Good morning, ma'am.
Okay, can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Slide দেখা যাচ্ছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We had just one little thing left from the last class. I think it was the cartel theory from the other market structures that we discussed. This is a part of oligopolistic market. A cartel theory, I'm guessing a lot of you actually went through this. আমি homework দেখে যা বুঝলাম যে এটা একবার হলেও পড়েছে কয়েকজন, so কিছুটা idea হবে. The cartel theory is nothing but a theory of oligopolistic market structure, which suggests that sometimes these oligopolistic firms, one of the assumptions আমরা ধরে, and sometimes these firms tend to basically join hands together. They join hands together, they create a sort of, let's say, organization. They come together and they behave as if it was just one single firm. They behave like a monopoly. That's the cartel theory. And a cartel is basically a group of firms that basically come together. And their main goal is to increase their total profits together, their joint profits together, not their individual profits, rather the profit they would earn after behaving as if they were one firm. So the cartel theory says times may come together and sort of like create a group so that they can behave as if they were a monopoly firm, behaving just like a single firm. This means that ওদের এখন কি হচ্ছে, because they are together now, as if they can pretend they're one single firm dominating the market, which means consumers have nowhere else to go. And because of that, they can exploit the consumers. How? By actually reducing their total output, reducing how much they're actually producing and supplying in the market, and charging a much higher price for that same product. Which means that because they're acting like a monopoly, they're acting like a single firm, consumers have nowhere to go. They have to pay the higher price and basically purchase a lower amount than they would if there was no cartel. The goal is to increase their joint profits. That's why cartels are usually formed. Now, joint profit বলতে বোঝাচ্ছে, সবাই কি দেখতে পাচ্ছে স্লাইডটা? Can everybody see the slide? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So joint profit actually বলতে বোঝাচ্ছে, suppose before the cartel, let's say there were 3 firms. Let's say you had firm A, firm B, firm C. And each of these firms were probably earning some profit individually. Once we add their individual profit, let's say the total profit is 100 taka. This is the total profit they were earning when they were not a part of the cartel. Individual ওদের যা profit সেটা আমরা calculate করলাম, করে আমরা just simply add করে দিলাম. Now let's say they create a cartel. Now they create a cartel, they are now behaving as if they're one firm. And because of which, let's say, together, their joint profit is, let's say, 120 taka. That's the reason they want to form a cartel. Individually, হয়তো A এর profit বাড়েনি, হয়তো B এর profit বেড়েছে, C এর profit বেড়েছে, something like that. We don't know what's happening individually. We're not bothered, because the whole idea, the whole basically logic behind the cartel is that their joint profit has increased now. আগে তাদের ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল প্রফিটকে অ্যাড করে আমরা যে প্রফিটটা টোটাল প্রফিট পেতাম মার্কেটে, তার থেকে বেশি এখন ওরা আর্ন করছে টুগেদার. That's why they're creating a cartel. Otherwise, why would they actually join hands together? There's no reason. There has to be a benefit behind this. That's why usually cartels are formed. But cartels are not very useful for the society. They're not very, let's say, if you think about the welfare aspect of it, it's not good for the consumers. And that's why cartels are actually, in many countries, they're actually banned. You cannot collude, you cannot join hands, firms cannot join hands together and start exploiting the customers. অনেক জায়গায় এটা banned, অনেক জায়গায় এটা heavily regulated by the government. And oftentimes it happens, if you think about like রোজার সময় বাংলাদেশে, it happens when you see that daily items, essential foods, their prices go up. And this could be because owners or basically store owners or producers, they end up creating a syndicate. And they create an artificial supply, যেটা কোনো প্রাইস বেড়ে যেতে পারে. এটা অনেক সময় বাস ট্রান্সপোর্টেশনও হয়, যেখানে ওরা একসাথে সবাই প্রাইস বাড়িয়ে দেয় টিকেটসের ডিউরিং লাইক পিক সিজন, লাইক রোজা and puja, things like that. So you can have situations like this throughout the world, but this is something that is not very favorable or not something that the society really wants. And one of the most infamous cartels throughout the world is in the drug industry. You will always, whenever you hear cartel, you will always hear about a drug cartel. Generally, that's what happens. Drug cartels, basically different producers of drugs, they sometimes join hands together and they behave as if there were only one producer that is supplying drugs throughout the world. But the issue with cartel is it's very difficult for cartels to ultimately survive, because there are lots of firms, lots of big firms that are in a cartel, and not everyone will always agree with each other. So একবার cartel টা create হলে it's very difficult for it to actually survive in the long run. So that's everything we needed to know about monopolistic market and oligopolistic market. এখানে আর কিছু ডিসকাস করার নেই, we are done with this topic. কারো কোনো কোয়েশ্চেন আছে এখানে? Do you have any questions from this topic?
No, ma'am.
Okay. If not, we have one more topic left for our finals, which is the factor market. Let me just share the slide with you. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is the last topic left for our final, which is the factor markets. This is from chapter 19 from Krugman and Wells. Basically, we're going to discuss mainly about the labor market. So we're going to see, so far we have looked at the market for goods and services. Jekta goods and market demand ki hoy, supply ki hoy, how is the price decided, etc., etc. Today we're going to look at the market slightly different way. This time we're going to look at the factor of production market, land, labor, capital. More specifically, we're looking at the labor market. এখানে আমরা যা ডিসকাস করছি লেবার মার্কেট নিয়ে, সেটা আমরা ক্যাপিটাল মার্কেট নিয়েও ডিসকাস করতে পারবো। It's not যে এটা লেবার মার্কেটেই শুধু অ্যাপ্লিকেবল, it's also applicable in the capital market. As long as you understand the idea, that's enough for you to, if you understand the idea, even if I change the factor of production, the conclusion will be the same. So we're going to see how firms, how producers make decisions on how to hire labor. That's what we're going to discuss. So আমরা দেখবো যে just like goods and services এর market আছে, there's a demand. For example, let's say the market for water bottles, there's a demand for water bottles, there's a supply of water bottles, and therefore there's a price of water bottles. The same goes with land, labor, capital. There's a labor market, there's a demand for labor, there's a supply of labor, and therefore there's a price of labor. The price is nothing but the wage. আমরা per hour যা পে করছি ওয়ার্কারকে, সেটাই হচ্ছে ওয়ার্কারের বা লেবারের প্রাইস, ফ্যাক্টর প্রাইস. So we're going to see how that is determined and how ultimately firms or producers decide how much workers they want to hire. The whole idea behind it is that every producer, or we already know, wants to maximize profit. So আমরা কি দেখেছি, whenever it's maximizing profit, how is it making a decision? Profit maximization কোথায় হয় মনে আছে সবার? What level of output? Profit maximization. একটা স্পেসিফিক কন্ডিশন, শর্ট রানে তো মোনোপলিও প্রফিট করে, লং রানেও প্রফিট করে, নট নেসেসারি যে শর্ট রানে শুধু প্রফিট করবে, সেটা শুধু পারফেক্ট কম্পিটিশন। মানে একটা কন্ডিশন আছে যে এই কন্ডিশনটা মিট হলে এই কোয়ান্টিটিতে প্রফিট ম্যাক্সিমাইজড হবে। আমরা যদি ডায়াগ্রাম আঁকি, আমি যদি পারফেক্ট কম্পিটিশনই আঁকি,
পারফেক্টের ক্ষেত্রে ম্যাম হবে প্রফিট ম্যাক্সিমাইজ হবে।
আমার কোয়েশ্চেন হচ্ছে which level of output maximizes profit? এই ডিসিশনটা আমরা কিভাবে নিই যে এই আউটপুটে প্রফিট ম্যাক্সিমাইজেশন হচ্ছে? হোয়াট কন্ডিশন? কি দেখে বুঝি যে হ্যাঁ এই কোয়ান্টিটিটা প্রডিউস করলে হয় প্রফিট ম্যাক্সিমাইজ হবে অথবা লস মিনিমাইজ হবে, যে কোনো ফার্মের ক্ষেত্রে, নট পারফেক্ট কম্পিটিশন, এনি ফার্ম।
ম্যাম MCR/MR সমান হলে, MC = MR.
Right, that's the case for all firms, not just perfect competition. That's how we determine profit maximizing level of output. So আমরা যখন ডিসাইড করছি কতটুকু প্রডিউস করব, আমরা কি MCMR কে ইউজ করে ডিসাইড করছি। বেসিক্যালি the marginal cost of producing one more unit and the marginal benefit of producing one more unit. Marginal analysis use করছি, right? That's what we are doing.
Yes,
Marginal analysis. We are deciding what is the cost if I produce one more unit versus how much can I earn from producing that one more unit. That's how we are making the decision. That's not just for production. It আমরা অন্য কিছুতে দেখেছি, like utility ক্ষেত্রে, should I consume one more unit or not? many things. We looked at initially আমরা দেখেছিলাম the marginal cost of studying one more hour versus not studying. So we looked at the marginal cost of studying one more hour. Maybe my grade is better. The marginal benefit is maybe my grade will become slightly better. And marginal cost হচ্ছে I'll probably lose 1 hour of sleep. We looked at these different types of marginal analysis. এখানে আমরা একই জিনিস দেখব যে ফার্মরা একটা ওয়েতে আমরা দেখেছি to maximize profit. What are they comparing? MC and MR of production. Now we're going to answer this question slightly differently. We want to find the number of workers or number of factor of production that we need to maximize that profit. This is what we're trying to answer in this topic, because we are looking at the factor of production, specifically the labor market. So we could have found out the quantity of output that maximizes profit and then check how many workers are producing that quantity. Instead of doing that, what we're going to do is, আমাদের goal হচ্ছে profit maximization. So we are going to figure out how many workers will help us to produce that profit maximizing level of output. That's what we are going to figure out. J, what is that quantity of workers that I need to produce my profit maximizing level of output? যেটাকে বলি profit maximizing quantity of workers. And সেটাও আমরা কিভাবে decision নিব? With the help of marginal analysis. We are going to compare between the costs of hiring a worker versus the benefits of hiring a worker. So if I am deciding if I should hire one more worker or not, I should compare between the marginal cost of hiring that worker with the marginal benefit of hiring that worker. This time আমরা production নিয়ে বলছি না, আমরা কি বলছি যে worker, আমি কি চাই? I want to know the number of workers I need to produce my profit maximizing level of output. And to decide that profit maximizing quantity of workers, the workers that will help me achieve that goal, I am going to use marginal analysis. I am going to compare between the marginal benefit of hiring that worker with the marginal cost of hiring that worker. It's just like production. Production আমরা compare করতাম the marginal benefit of producing one more unit with the marginal cost of producing one more unit. Here, it's the marginal benefit of hiring one more worker versus the marginal cost of hiring one more worker. Now, from your knowledge so far, এতদিন economics এ যা পড়েছি, what do you think is the marginal cost of hiring a worker? যে একটা ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করলে আমার কি মানে what is the money that I have to spend on that worker? কি খরচ করতে হচ্ছে? You are a producer, you are an employer, you own a firm, you're going to hire a worker. What do you have to spend on that worker? আমার
I
ওয়ার্কারকে
have
কি
to
দিতে
pay,
হবে?
ma'am.
Pay him?
Okay, pay করতে
That
হবে।
means তার ওয়েজটা, রাইট? ওকে, যেটা আমার পে করতে হবে, that is nothing but the marginal cost of hiring a worker. For example, এখানে কিন্তু একটা অনেক বড় assumption হচ্ছে this market, labor market is perfectly competitive, which means that the wage যেটা আমরা ওয়ার্কারকে পে করব, that is determined in the labor market. So if I'm an individual firm hiring a worker, আমার তাকে কি ওয়েজ দিতে হবে? মার্কেট সাপ্লাই, মার্কেট ডিমান্ড অফ লেবার যে ওয়েজটা ডিসাইড করবে সেটা আমার তাকে পে করতে হবে. So every time I hire a worker, I have to pay that worker the equilibrium wage in the market. Suppose the equilibrium wage in the market is 200 টাকা per hour. Every hour 200 টাকা করে আমার একটা ওয়ার্কারকে পে করতে হবে. That means every time I hire a new worker, that worker has to be paid 200 টাকা per hour. That is the marginal cost of hiring one more worker. আমি একটা ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করলে তাকে তার ওয়েজ দিতে হবে আমার, যে ওয়েজটা সবার জন্যই সমান, বিকজ ওয়েজটা হচ্ছে ইকুইলিব্রিয়াম ওয়েজ ডিসাইডেড ইন দ্য লেবার মার্কেট উইথ দ্য হেল্প অফ দ্য ডিমান্ড ফর লেবার এন্ড দ্য সাপ্লাই অফ লেবার. So we are assuming, this is a big assumption, we are assuming the labor market is perfectly competitive. Perfectly competitive বলতে কি বোঝাচ্ছে? Producers are price takers as well as the workers are price takers. Perfect competition কি সবাই price taker হয়. No one individually has control over the price, which means no one individually has control over the wages. এখানে price of labor হচ্ছে wages. So tell me, who will demand labor and who will supply labor? In this situation, এই মার্কেটে কে লেবারকে ডিমান্ড করবে আর কে লেবার সাপ্লাই করবে? Who is going to demand workers and who is going to supply workers? You have two players here, firms and workers. So labor কে demand করবে আর labor কে supply করবে এই দুইজনের মধ্যে?
ফার্ম ডিমান্ড করবে ম্যাম আর ওয়ার্কার
Firm
করবে।
demand করবে, and workers, people like me, we are going to supply our labor. So this time your firm is on the buying side of the market, in the resource market, in the factor of production market. এতদিন আমরা কি করে দেখেছি, গুডস মার্কেটে, সার্ভিসেস মার্কেটে কি দেখেছি, the firm is the supplier, is the seller. It produces goods and sells in the market. But here we're looking at the labor market, the market for factor of production. That means the firm will demand labor. It will hire labor to produce goods and services. Whereas the workers, people like me, if you are working, people like you who are in the labor force, they're the ones who are supplying the labor. এই জিনিস যেন মনে থাকে সবার, don't think যে এখানেও firm supplier. Firm is not the supplier here. Firm is demanding labor here. It will hire labor, it will buy labor. But because it's perfect competition, everyone is a price taker. So firms, they will pay the equilibrium wage rate that has been set by the market. The workers will also earn the equilibrium wage rate. So as a firm, I cannot offer a higher or a lower wage. And as a worker, I cannot ask for a higher or lower wage. I will be paid whatever the market has decided. এই জিনিসটা যেন সবার মনে থাকে।
ম্যাম ওয়েজটা কি আসলে?
ওয়েজ বলতে বোঝায় তোমার পার আওয়ার যে ইনকামটা পে করা হয়। So there's a difference between salary and wage. Salary is like a fixed amount per month. You will get this much money regardless of how many hours you're working, and wage is usually determined as an hourly rate. So every hour আমি ওয়ার্ক করব আমাকে 200 টাকা পে করা হবে। That means আমি যদি আজকে 10 ঘন্টা কাজ করি, I'll get 2000 টাকা, versus কালকে যদি আমি let's say 20 ঘন্টা কাজ করি, I'll get 4000 টাকা। ওয়েজ হচ্ছে পার আওয়ার রেটটাকে আমরা সাধারণত বলে থাকি। The price of labor, this is a term, this is like a umbrella term, a broad term. The price of labor টাকে আমরা wage বলে থাকি। Think about price of capital. Capital এর price কে আমরা interest বলে থাকি। Think about goods and services, that's actually the price of the good itself. Think about entrepreneurship. What do you pay an entrepreneur? You pay its profit. So what are you paying a labor? You're paying the labor its wage. Is this clear?
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Whatever you pay the labor for, whatever you pay a worker for its labor, whatever labor it's supplying, সেটাকে আমরা wage বলি। It's just like a price of a good. This time the good is the labor. This time the good is the worker. That's it. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
আচ্ছা। So আমরা দেখলাম marginal cost আমরা বুঝলাম যে marginal cost হচ্ছে nothing but the wage. Every time I hire a worker, I have to pay him or her the wage. Now, obviously I'm comparing marginal cost with marginal benefit. তারপরে তো আমি decide করব যে এই ওয়ার্কারটাকে আমি হায়ার করব কিনা। What do you think is the marginal benefit of hiring a worker? As a producer, if you are a producer, what would be your benefit from hiring one more worker? When would you want to hire a worker? বেনিফিটটা কি হতে পারে, কিভাবে আমি বেনিফিটটাকে মেজার করতে পারি?
ম্যাম টার্গেট ফিল আপ হবে।
What does it mean target fill up হবে? যখন আমি হায়ার করছি তাকে, আমি একবার চিন্তা করছি যে okay, I have to pay him this much, so that's the marginal cost, that's the wage. I also have to check what benefit he will bring for my firm. So very simple, don't think at the high thought যেও না, একদম simple level এ চিন্তা করো যে কি হতে পারে।
This will help me to increase the output.
Okay, so you're close. That means I need to figure out how much this worker can produce for me, right? তাকে আমার হায়ার করলে আমার এই জিনিসটা একটা চিন্তা করতে হবে, বাট সেই প্রডিউস যেটা করবে সেটা তো মেজার্ড হবে লেটস সে ইউনিটস এ, লাইক ইফ ইউ থিঙ্ক অ্যাবাউট লাইক কেজিস অর নাম্বারস এ, রাইট? বাট ওয়েজ ইজ সামথিং দ্যাট ইজ মেজার্ড ইন টার্মস অফ কারেন্সি, ইন টার্মস অফ ইটস মনিটারি টার্মস এটাকে মেজার করি, লাইক পার আওয়ার 200 টাকা, পার আওয়ার $20, এভাবে ওয়েজকে মেজার করি। তাহলে যে বেনিফিটটা সে আমাকে দিচ্ছে সেটাকে তো আমি নিশ্চয়ই কেজিতে কম্পেয়ার করলে হবে না, রাইট? মেজার করলে হবে না, দে আর নট কম্পেয়ারেবল। I can compare $20 per hour with 50 kgs of rice. That doesn't make any sense. What should I do then? Wage utility কেন হবে? আমি তো ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করছি, তো তার থেকে আমি কি বেনিফিট পাচ্ছি? সে যেটা প্রডিউস করছে সেটার ভ্যালু ইন দ্য মার্কেট, দ্যাটস দ্য মার্জিনাল বেনিফিট অফ হায়ারিং দ্যাট ওয়ার্কার। that if I hire that one more worker, I know I have to pay him the wage, the current equilibrium wage in the market, which is the marginal cost of hiring that one more worker. The marginal benefit is the value of whatever or how much this worker is producing for me. Value is what will happen, how much will I earn if I sell the product that is being produced by this worker in the market. এই নতুন ওয়ার্কারটা সাপোজ আমি তাকে হায়ার করছি, আমি লেটস সে শার্টস প্রোডিউস করি, তাকে হায়ার করছি পার আওয়ার আমি তাকে 200 টাকা করে দিব, দ্যাটস দ্য ওয়েজ। বাট তাকে হায়ার করলে সে আমার জন্য লেটস সে 15 শার্টস প্রোডিউস করে দিতে পারবে পার আওয়ার। তাহলে আমার চিন্তা করতে হবে, আই নিড টু ফিগার আউট এই 15 শার্টসটাকে যদি আমি মার্কেটে সেল করি, হাউ মাচ ক্যান আই আর্ন ফ্রম দোজ 15 শার্টস। Then I can put a monetary value on that. Then I can compare between the 200 taka per hour with the value of the 15 shirts that this worker is producing for me. সেটাকে আমরা বলি the value of the marginal product of labor. That is the benefit that I will enjoy or experiencing from hiring one more worker. This is how much revenue this worker is generating for me. এই ওয়ার্কারটাকে হায়ার করলে সে আমার জন্য কতটুকু রেভিনিউ এনে দিবে, দ্যাটস দ্য ভ্যালু অফ দ্য মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ লেবার। তো সেটার জন্য আই নিড টু ইনফরমেশন। আই নিড টু নো দ্য মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ দ্যাট ওয়ার্কার, দ্যাট মিনস when I hire that one more worker, how much he or she is able to produce for me, as well as the price of the product that I'm selling in the market. I need two pieces of information. Together they will give me the value of the marginal product of that worker. এটা শুধু লেবারের ক্ষেত্রে না, এটা ক্যাপিটালও হতে পারতো। The value of the marginal product of capital would have been how much that unit of capital produces for me, along with the price of the product that I'm selling in the market. That's the marginal benefit from hiring one more unit of a factor of production. So that means I need to know two things. I need to know the price of the good that I'm selling in the market and the marginal product of that one more unit of factor of production. In our example, it's labor. So that is known as the value of the marginal product of labor. যে আমি এই ওয়ার্কারটাকে হায়ার করলে সে আমার জন্য 15 শার্টস প্রোডিউস করে দিবে, এন্ড এই 15 শার্টসটাকে যখন আমি মার্কেটে সেল করব, ইন রিটার্ন আমি কতটুকু আর্ন করছি। সো 15 শার্টস মাল্টিপ্লাইড উইথ দ্য প্রাইস অফ আ শার্ট, দ্যাট ইজ দ্য ভ্যালু অফ দ্য মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ দ্যাট লেবার। I need to see how much revenue that worker can help me earn. তাহলে আমি কম্পেয়ার করতে পারবো তার কস্টটা ভার্সেস তার বেনিফিটটা। সবাই কি বুঝতে পারছে যে মার্জিনাল বেনিফিটটা কিভাবে আমরা অ্যাকচুয়ালি ক্যালকুলেট করছি ফর আ ওয়ার্কার? ইজ এভরিওয়ান ফলোইং?
Yes, ma'am.
আরেকবার একটু বললে ভালো হতো ম্যাম।
ওকে, মার্জিনাল কস্ট কি? এভরি টাইম আই হায়ার আ ওয়ার্কার, আমার তাকে কি হচ্ছে, ওয়েজ দিতে হচ্ছে, রাইট? That's the marginal cost of hire that. But what is the marginal benefit? আমি তাকে হায়ার করলে how is it helping me? What is the benefit I'm gaining? Of course, however much his or her production can help me earn. আমি একটা ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করছি, তাকে আমার ওয়েজ দিতে হচ্ছে পার আওয়ার 200 টাকা, that's the marginal cost. তাকে হায়ার করলে this worker, I know this worker can produce 15 shirts for me. Now I can't compare 200 taka with 15 shirts, that doesn't make sense. They both have to be in the same unit of measurement, so both have to be calculated in terms of money. So 200 taka ke nishchoy amar some value of money diye compare korte hobe, right?
Yes ma'am.
Okay, তাহলে এই যে 15 shirts টা সে প্রোডিউস করছে, I need to know if I sell those 15 shirts in the market, because I'm a producer of shirts, how much can I earn from those 15 shirts, which ultimately means how much can I earn from this worker. এই 15 shirts টাকে যদি আমি সেল করি, একটা শার্টের দাম যদি 20 টাকা হয়ে থাকে মার্কেটে, if I sell it in the market, how much will I earn? 15 shirts কি 20 টাকায় সেল করছি, what can I earn? 15 into 20, that's how much will I will earn, right?
Yes ma'am.
300 taka, right? So what is the benefit, marginal benefit hiring that one more worker? 300 taka of revenue from that worker. What is the cost of hiring that worker? 200 taka. Should I hire the worker or not? So far what do you think? Should I hire this worker or not? তার উপরে 200 টাকা খরচ করতে হচ্ছে, বাট সে আমাকে 300 টাকা আর্ন করে দিচ্ছে।
হায়ার করবো ম্যাম
উচিত।
Yes, ma'am. Have.
সো
100 টাকা
এই যে
100 টাকা।
মার্জিনাল বেনিফিটটা কি? দিস ইজ নাথিং বাট দ্য ভ্যালু অফ দ্য মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ লেবার। এই যে ওয়ার্কারটার মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ লেবার কত ছিল? 15 shirts. What was the value of those 15 shirts? 300 টাকা Vmpl. Is this clear now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So what did we
Yes,
do? We
ma'am.
compared between the marginal cost of hiring a worker and the marginal benefit of hiring a worker, which is the wage of a worker versus the Vmpl of a worker. And আমরা so far এতদিন যা marginal analysis করেছি সব জায়গায় আমরা একটা জিনিস কিন্তু কমন দেখেছি, that the optimal situation is where marginal cost and marginal benefit are equal to each other. And that's the case in the labor market as well. If I'm a firm who is deciding how many workers to hire, the profit maximizing quantity of worker will be where the wage and the Vmpl are equal to each other. The profit maximizing quantity of goods and services কোথায় হয়? যেখানে MR and MC equal. That is the benefit from producing one more unit of output versus the cost of producing one more unit of output. The same story is here. This time it's in the labor market. How many workers should I hire to maximize my profit? What is the profit maximizing quantity of workers? That amount of workers where the wage, that's the marginal cost, is equal to the Vmpl, which is the marginal benefit. Optimal situation আমরা so far কিন্তু দেখেছি marginal analysis এ যেখানে MC আর MB are equal to each other. Different situations এ marginal benefit, marginal cost কি differently calculate করা হচ্ছে। এখানে marginal cost কে calculate করা হচ্ছে in terms of the wage and marginal benefit কে calculate করা হচ্ছে in terms of the value of the marginal product of labor. But at the end of the day, the idea is still the same. Wherever the marginal cost and the marginal benefit are equal, that's the optimal situation. In terms of labor markets, that's the profit maximizing amount of workers that the firm should hire. এতটুকু কি সবাই বুঝতে পেরেছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
এখানে একটা ছোট এক্সাম্পল আছে of a farm who produces wheat. এই এক্সাম্পলটা আমরা প্রোডাকশন কস্ট চ্যাপ্টারেও দেখেছি আগে। So এখানে just information দেয়া আছে that when you have different amounts of workers, how much wheat can be produced and the marginal product of that specific worker. So আমরা already জানি marginal product of labor or marginal product of any factor of production is nothing but the MPL, which means marginal product of labor, is nothing but the change in the quantity of output divided by the change in the number of workers. So what happens if I hire one more worker? What happens to my output? That difference is nothing but the marginal product of that worker. এখানে একটা ছোট্ট table দেয়া আছে. Let's look at this. Suppose you have 0 workers, obviously 0 wheat will be produced. You cannot produce wheat without any worker. Suppose now you hire one more worker. After you hire a worker, the total amount of wheat that is being produced by this farm is now 19 bushels of wheat. So তাহলে marginal product of the first worker কি হবে? This will be the change in the quantity. So 19 minus 0 divided by the change in the number of workers. 1 minus 0. So the output when there is 1 worker minus the output when there is 0 worker divided by the number of workers 1 minus 0. So this is 19 bushels, which means the marginal product of the first worker is 19 bushels of wheat. Suppose now you hire one more worker and these 2 workers together can produce 36 bushels of wheat. তাহলে the marginal product of this second worker is going to be 36 minus 19 divided by 2 minus 1. এখানে always workers are changing by 1 unit here in this example. So divided by 1 না করলেও হবে. Simply just subtract it. That's enough. So this means that the marginal product of the second worker is 17 bushels of wheat. The marginal product of the third worker. So together 3 workers can produce 51 bushels of wheat. Therefore, the marginal product of the third worker is 51 minus 36, which is 15 bushels of wheat. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ লেবারটা কিভাবে ক্যালকুলেট করেছি? এটা আমরা আগেও দেখেছি। এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম,
বাকিরা, everyone else?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you see marginal product of labor actually falls? Do you remember why? এটা কিন্তু আমরা জানি. The reason we already know. Why does the marginal product of labor fall? ভেরিয়েবল ইনপুটের মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট কেন ফল করতে থাকে সেটা কিন্তু আমরা জানি। There is a law. Do you remember the name of the law?
Diminishing law.
Law of diminishing.
Diminishing marginal return.
Very good. Law of diminishing marginal returns. So if you're in the short run, if you hire more and more of your variable input, what happens? Every additional variable input, in this case labor, produces less than the previous one. So that's why আমরা যদি marginal product of labor curve কে draw করি, generally it will be downward sloping. So every time I hire a worker, what is happening? That worker is producing something for me, but that's less than the previous worker. So marginal product of labor সবাই calculate করতে পারবে? Can everyone
Yes,
produce, sorry, calculate MPL? Everyone else? Bakira?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we have done this. আমরা অনেকবার marginal values calculate করেছি, nothing new. Now the question is, what do I do with this value? So first কাজ হচ্ছে, because I'm looking at the number of workers I want to hire. So I need two information. I need the marginal cost of hiring that worker and the value of the marginal product of hiring that worker. So the marginal cost and the marginal benefit of hiring a worker. So marginal cost হচ্ছে wage, যেটা constant, which is equilibrium wage, সেটা আমাদের কাছে information থাকবে. Marginal benefit, that is the VMPL, I need to calculate it. কিভাবে calculate করব? I first need to calculate the marginal product of labor and multiply that with the price of the product in the market. That's how I will find VMPL. And those two curves, when I draw them, will help me determine how many workers I should be hiring. So let's look at an example here. এখানে already আগে যে টেবিলটা দেখেছি সেটা ইনফরমেশন দেয়া আছে. You have the quantity of workers, you have the quantity of wheat they're producing, and you have the marginal product of each worker here. This is from the previous table. We already have this information. Now we want to calculate the VMPL and ultimately how much this new worker can help earn me, how much profit this new worker will add to my production. So we'll look at that later on. First আমরা VMPL টাকে derive করব. তো এখানে already information দেয়া আছে যে per bushel of wheat is being sold for $20 in the market. So when I'm a producer, আমি যে wheatটা produce করছি per unit সেটা $20 করে মার্কেটে সেল হচ্ছে, and the wage per worker, the per worker is being paid $200. So that's the equilibrium wage in the market. So if I am a producer, if I am hiring workers, I have to pay every worker $200. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Individual workers কে আমার $200 করে পে করতে হবে, individual workers কে. So first thing, let's calculate the VMPL. VMPL কি? The price of the product multiplied with the marginal product of that worker. So for example, the first worker's MPL, এখানে marginal product of labor already করা আছে, just এই আগের টেবিলটা থেকে এটা নেওয়া হয়েছে. So the first worker produces 19 bushels of wheat, which means if I sell 19 bushels of wheat in the market, how much will I earn? 20 into 19. So per unit is $20, and you're selling, this worker is producing 19 bushels for you. If you sell that, you're going to earn how much? 20 into 19 is?
380.
380. So that means the VMPL, the marginal benefit from hiring that one more worker, is worth $380. Okay, the second worker's MPL is 17 bushels of wheat. That means the second worker can produce 17 bushels of wheat for me. Now, if I sell those 17 bushels of wheat in the market, how much will I earn in return? 20 into 17, which is $340. So that's the value of the marginal product of the second worker. What is the VMPL of the third worker?
300.
300, which is 15 into 20. The third worker produces 15 bushels of wheat into the price of each bushel of wheat, which is 20. So when I sell this third worker's marginal product in the market, it will help me earn $300. Similarly, the fourth worker's VMPL is 13 into 20, $260. So এতটুকু সবাই বুঝতে পেরেছি VMPL টা কিভাবে ক্যালকুলেট করব?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Then
ma'am.
you have your wage per worker, which is nothing but the marginal cost of each worker. That's always 200. If I hire one worker, I have to pay that worker $200. If I hire one more worker, I have to pay the second worker also $200. If I hire a third worker, the third worker will also be paid $200. So that means the marginal cost is the same $200 every time unless equilibrium wage কোনো change আসে. So far there is no change. তাহলে আমরা এটাকে একটা ডায়াগ্রামে দেখি। Let's look at this diagram. The table has been completed here. এখানে already আমরা সবগুলো VMPL calculate করেছি. Now the job is we are going to plot the VMPL curve and the wage together. That means the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. That will help us figure out how many workers I should hire. Just like production, আমরা কি দেখি marginal revenue curve, marginal cost curve কে একসাথে draw করে decide করি যে how much will be produced. এখানে VMPL curve and wage, we're looking at both of them together to determine how much to be produced. So let's look at the diagram. The first thing we're going to look at is what are the two axes we have. Your vertical axis is your wage rate as well as your VMPL, and your horizontal axis is your quantity of workers. Horizontal axis আমরা quantity of workers রাখবো, আর vertical axis এ আমরা wage কেও plot করব as well as the value of the marginal product of labor. এতটুকু সবাই দেখতে পাচ্ছে ডায়াগ্রামে? Can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Now, once we have calculated the VMPL, our job is to just plot it. VMPL, that is the value of the marginal product of labor. Marginal, it is actually a marginal value. তার মানে কিভাবে প্লট করা উচিত? All marginal values are plotted the same way. So far, কিভাবে দেখেছি? Marginal value কিভাবে প্লট করি? Marginal, anything marginal.
It's downward sloping.
No, that's the shape. How do I plot it in a diagram? Plot it
Middle 0 to 1 এর middle
in the middle, in your horizontal axis. দুইটা পয়েন্টের মিডলে অলওয়েজ আমরা প্লট করি any marginal value. তো VMPL টা কি? VMPL is the value of the marginal product of labor. So this is also a marginal value. It has to be plotted between 2 points on the x-axis, the horizontal axis. So let's look at the quantities. So first thing first, যখন you have your first worker's VMPL is $380. That means the $380 will be plotted between 0 and 1 because that's the VMPL of the first worker. So this would be where this point would be exactly in between 0 and 1. And on your y-axis, you will plot your 380 as usual. Y-axis আমাদের কোনো চিন্তা নেই, যেভাবে আমরা প্লট করি সেভাবেই করব. Maybe this is 380. So this is where the VMPL of the first worker will be plotted. The VMPL of the second worker is $340. So it will be plotted between 0 and 1, between the first worker and the second worker. So 340 will be plotted as usual. So this is where 340 should be. So this is the VMPL of the second worker. The VMPL of the third worker is going to be $300. So between 2 and 3, this is our point on the x-axis. On the y-axis, it will be exactly at 300. So this is the VMPL of the third worker. এভাবে করে আমাদের যতগুলো ওয়ার্কার আছে up to the 8th worker আমরা প্লট করে নিব and then join these points. This is my VMPL curve. That's the value of the marginal product of labor curve. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পেরেছে how this was plotted?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So on the
Yes, ma'am.
x-axis, because it's the VMPL curve, value of the marginal product of labor, on the x-axis, that is on the axis of the quantity of workers, you're going to plot them between 2 points. So if it's the first worker, it will be plotted between 0 and 1. If it's the second worker, it will be plotted between 1 and 2, and so on. Whereas on the y-axis, on your vertical axis, you will plot as usual. Specific যে ভ্যালুটা সেখানেই আমরা প্লট করব পয়েন্টটাকে. It doesn't have to be in the middle. That's not how we will plot in this axis. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now We have one of the curves, which is Vmpl, and the other is your wage. Wage-টা কি? Always 200. আমি ফার্স্ট ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করলেও 200 পে করতে হবে, সেকেন্ড ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করলেও 200 পে করতে হবে, থার্ড ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করলেও 200 পে করতে হবে, and so on. তাহলে it is nothing but just a horizontal line at 200, right? It's always the same, regardless of how many workers I'm hiring. Every worker is being paid the same. That means you'll draw a completely horizontal line at the current wage rate. Market wage rate হচ্ছে $200 per worker. You'll draw a completely horizontal line there. This is your wage. That's it. So tell me now, এটা বুঝাতে সবাই ওয়েজটা কিভাবে ড্র করতে হবে? It's just a straight line, horizontal line, nothing else. এটা কি ক্লিয়ার সবার?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now let's look at the first worker. First worker কে আমার পে করতে হচ্ছে how much? $200. How much is the first worker earning for me? 380. So the value, the Vmpl of the first worker is 380. I am paying the first worker $200. Should I hire this worker?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Reason is তার উপরে আমার খরচ করতে হচ্ছে $200, but সে আমার জন্য earn করে দিচ্ছে কতটুকু? $380. So that means if I look at the difference between whatever he or she is earning for me and whatever I have to spend on him or her, that is the additional profit from that worker. তাহলে আমার যা প্রফিট আছে এই ওয়ার্কারটা $180 অ্যাড করছে to that profit. আমি যখন এই ওয়ার্কারটাকে হায়ার করছি, what is happening? I am paying him $200, but he is earning for me $380. 380 minus 200, that's $180. So আমি extra $180 earn করছি from that one worker. That is the additional profit from that one worker. That means I should hire that worker, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
this goes for as long as your Vmpl is higher than the wage, you should hire that worker. So for the first worker, the Vmpl is higher than the wage. For the second worker, the Vmpl is also higher than the wage. For the third worker, the Vmpl is also higher than the wage. For the fourth worker, the Vmpl is also higher than the wage. That means I should keep hiring as long as the Vmpl is higher than the wage. Maniki, the marginal benefit of hiring that one worker is more than the marginal cost of hiring that one worker. Well, at the end of the day, ki hocche amar net benefit hocche I should hire that worker. As long as Vmpl is higher than the wage, you should keep hiring that worker. Let's look at the seventh worker. Seventh worker in Vmpl ki $140. So 20 into 7, $20 per bushel of wheat into 7 bushels of wheat. The seventh worker is producing 7 bushels of wheat. So $140. I have to pay him $200. Should I hire this worker?
No, ma'am.
No.
No. If I hire him, my profit will go down by $60. I am losing $60 from hiring that one more worker. 140 minus 200. That means if the wage is higher than the Vmpl, that's the marginal cost of hiring a worker is more than the marginal benefit, I should not hire that worker. That means I should instead fire that worker. I should not hire if the wage is higher than Vmpl. Where should I stop? Where they're both equal to each other. এখানে intersect করছে কত quantity of workers there? 5.
5.
That means up to the fifth worker is where I should be hiring. I should not hire more than 5 workers because I will lose money every time I hire a worker. I should not hire less than 5 workers because I am essentially letting go of the money I could have earned. আমি যদি fourth worker এসে stop করতাম, এই যে fifth worker থেকে যে আমি additional profit earn করতে পারতাম সেটা কিন্তু আমি earn করব না if I don't hire him. That means I should stop at the fifth worker. Any more will make me lose money. Any less would mean that I am actually not earning the money I could have earned. The same story. Hire where your MC is equal to marginal benefit, which means hire where your wage is equal to Vmpl. So এটা diagram অনেক সময় দেখা যাবে যে টেবলে mathematically you won't get exactly that value. For example, at the fifth worker, do you see that the Vmpl is $220, whereas the wage is $200. So you still have some positive value. So it's not necessary যে আমরা mathematically যখন আমরা actually calculation করছি আমরা exact value পেতে পারি, not necessary. সেটা হবে কখন? When there are more workers. In this example, you only have 8 workers. If I had hundreds and thousands of workers, you would see these two numbers would become closer and closer and closer. Obviously, this is a class. আমরা hundreds and thousands of workers নিয়ে এখানে discuss করব না. We don't have the capacity right now. So আমরা small number of workers দিয়ে discuss করছি, যেটার কারণে mathematically যখন ক্যালকুলেশন করছি টেবলে হয়তো আমরা দেখবো না যে exact same value পাচ্ছি। But look at the diagram. Diagram draw করলে কিন্তু এই ওয়েজটা আর VMPL টা একই জায়গায় intersect করছে, that is at 5 workers, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
That
ma'am.
means I should hire up to the 5th worker. Look at this. After the 5th worker, 6, 7, 8, কি হচ্ছে? What is happening? আমার profit কমে যাচ্ছে না every time I hire one more worker?
Yes, ma'am.
That
Yes, ma'am.
means I should stop
ma'am.
at 5 workers. I should not hire more than 5 workers. So not necessarily always you will see in the table that you will get the exact value for VMPL and wage. And that's the case for MR, MC, all of that as well. কিন্তু যখন আমরা অনেক বেশি প্রোডাকশন করছি অথবা অনেক ওয়ার্কার্সকে হায়ার করছি তখন দেখবো নাম্বারটা আসলে it becomes closer and closer. এখানে তো we just have 8 workers. So the idea is optimal position কোথায় যেখানে wage and VMPL is the same, which is ultimately telling you keep hiring as long as VMPL is higher than wage. Do not hire if VMPL is less than the wage. Where should I stop? Where the VMPL of the last worker is equal to the wage. In this example, with the help of the diagram, we have decided 5 workers is the profit maximizing number of workers. That's where I should.
I have a question.
Yes, bolo.
Ma'am, VMPL আর যদি ওয়েজ দুটো সেম হয়ে যায় ইকুয়াল হয়ে যায় তখন কি হবে?
এখানে ইন্টারসেক্ট করবে। দেখো ওয়েজটা তো একটা কমপ্লিটলি হরিজন্টাল লাইন, 5th ওয়ার্কারে গিয়ে এটা ইন্টারসেক্ট করতো যদি এক্স্যাক্টলি। তখন কি হতো এই নতুন ওয়ার্কারটাকে অ্যাড করলে না আমি কিছু গেইন করছি না কিছু লুজ করছি, আই উইল হায়ার দ্যাট ওয়ার্কার অ্যাকচুয়ালি। আমার প্রফিট তো কমবে না, তাই না?
ঠিক আছে, হ্যাঁ ম্যাম বুঝতে পারছি।
প্রফিট কমলে আমি তাকে হায়ার করব না, কিন্তু আমার প্রফিট কমছে না, মানে আই হায়ার দ্যাট ওয়ার্কার, আফটার দ্যাট আই ওয়ন্ট হায়ার এনিমোর। দ্যাটস ওয়্যার আই স্টপ অ্যাকচুয়ালি। বুঝা যাচ্ছে? Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, here there's a small table. There's an extra column here যেটা actually বইয়ে নেই. I wanted to show you. এই যে আমরা সবসময় বলি যেখানে marginal benefit, marginal cost equal to each other, that's where our optimal situation is, blah blah blah. এত কিছু যে বলি যে MRMC যেখানে equal, that's the maximum profit. I can actually prove it with the help of numbers here. এখানে I've created this table to this column to show you যে what happens to my profit every time I hire a worker. So profit টা কি? Total revenue minus total cost. Total revenue কি? Price of what I am selling into the amount that I am selling. That's total revenue. So the price per unit of wheat into the quantity of wheat that is being sold. That's the total revenue. Total cost is the cost of producing that quantity of wheat. এখানে total cost এ আমি শুধু variable cost include করেছি, which is wage into the labor. So per unit আমি কতটুকু pay করছি worker কে into the number of workers. That's a variable cost. এখানে even if you added a fixed cost, the story would still be the same. It's just the number would be different. Otherwise, the story would still be the same. So ekhane let's see what happens to profit. Total revenue, price into quantity. Price is $20. Quantity, how much is being produced? 19 units. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে? Sorry, not MPL, quantity.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
this and this price per unit into the amount of wheat being produced. That will give me the total revenue from selling that amount of wheat. So that means when the farm is producing 19 bushels of wheat, the total revenue is 19 into $20. That's $380. What is the total cost? আমরা এখানে শুধু ধরে নিচ্ছি ভেরিয়েবল কস্ট আছে, ফিক্সড কস্ট নিলেও কোনো প্রবলেম নেই, জাস্ট ভ্যালুটা নাম্বারটা চেঞ্জ হবে। The idea is still the same, you see. So ধরে নাও there is no fixed cost. Let's just assume it. So that means total cost তখন কি হবে? The number of workers into the wage per worker. So you have one worker producing 19 bushels of wheat. That means What is the total cost? 1 into 200. Per worker ke 200 pay korchi. So that's $200. So total revenue is 380. Total cost is $200. So that means the profit earned from selling 19 bushels of wheat is $180. What is the profit from selling 36 bushels of wheat? So when the farm produces 36 bushels of wheat and it sells in the market, the total revenue is 36 into $20. That's $720. That's the total revenue. Total cost, look at the number of workers. There are 2 workers, and that means the total cost of those workers is 2 into 200. Per worker ke ami $200 kore dicchi, tahole total cost hocche $400. So that means the total revenue 720 minus total cost 400, that's $320. That's the profit earned by the firm when it produces and sells 36 bushels of wheat. এভাবে করে আমরা different quantities এর জন্য প্রফিটটা ক্যালকুলেট করে নিতে পারি। Do you see that the profit keeps increasing up to 75 bushels of wheat where you have 5 workers? দেখা যাচ্ছে 180, 320, 420.
Yes, ma'am.
480, 500. After that, তারপরে আমি যত প্রোডাকশন বাড়াচ্ছি 84, 91, 96 bushels of wheat, যত প্রোডাকশন বাড়াচ্ছি, obviously I need more workers. As I hire more workers, what's happening to the profit? 480, 420, 320, profit fall করছে না?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
That means the highest profit is actually where we have 5 workers. That is our profit maximizing level of workers. That's what we wanted to find. How many workers can help me produce that amount of quantity which will give me the highest possible profit. So এই যে আমরা বলি MCMR যেখানে equal অথবা marginal where the wage and the Vmpl is equal, that's the profit maximizing quantity of labor. That is actually true. We can somewhat prove it with math. But that is the optimal condition. We want to reach that point. So এখানে একটা fixed cost add করে দিলে কিছুই হতো না, নাম্বারটা জাস্ট চেঞ্জ হয়ে যেত। Suppose your fixed cost is let's say $20. So just সবগুলা থেকে just 20 মাইনাস করে দিলেই আমাদের প্রফিটটা পেয়ে যেতাম, রাইট? কস্টটা কি $20 বেড়ে যাচ্ছে, তাই বুঝতে পারছে?
ম্যাম এই এক্সাম্পলে ফিক্সড কস্ট দেয়া নেই, বাট ফিক্সড কস্ট মানে এমনি দেয়া থাকতে পারে, তখন আমরা ওটা টোটাল কস্ট অ্যাড করে টোটাল রেভিনিউ থেকে মাইনাস করে
এখানে আমি
দিলাম।
জাস্ট তোমাদের আইডিয়াটা দেখাচ্ছি যে অ্যাকচুয়ালি প্রফিটটা আসলে কিন্তু ম্যাক্সিমাইজ হচ্ছে when there are 5 workers. তো এখানে যদি আমি লেবার কস্ট দিয়ে জাস্ট ভেরিয়েবল কস্ট ইনক্লুড করছি, বাট সাপোজ এই যে ফিক্সড কস্ট থাকলো একটা $20 এর, তখন কি হচ্ছে কস্টটা $20 করে বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। দ্যাট অ্যাকচুয়ালি মিন্স প্রফিট কি $20 করে কমে যাচ্ছে এভরি টাইম, রাইট?
ইয়েস ম্যাম।
তো কথাটা কি হচ্ছে, স্টোরিটা স্টিল দ্য সেম, হাইয়েস্ট প্রফিট কিন্তু 5 ওয়ার্কার্সই হচ্ছে স্টিল 20 মাইনাস করলেও, তাই না?
Yes, ma'am.
That's the whole idea. If you understand that idea, that where the marginal cost, that is wage, and the marginal benefit, where Vmpl are equal to each other, that's where profit is maximized. That's more than enough for you to understand. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So এই যে আমরা ডায়াগ্রামটা ড্র করলাম, we'll actually rely on the diagram to answer this question. So far we've figured out that as long as your Vmpl is higher than the wage, hire that worker. If it's lower than the wage, do not hire that worker. Stop where the Vmpl and the wage are equal for a worker. That's where we'll stop. Now, one more thing we want to know, basically keep in mind, is that Vmpl curve, this Vmpl curve is also known as the demand for labor for an individual firm. So let's say this is a firm, এটা একটা firm এ basically hiring decision নিয়ে আমরা discuss করছি যে how many workers to hire. This Vmpl curve is also the demand curve for labor for that firm. That means the Vmpl, as my number of workers changes, it ultimately depends on the wage rate. এই যে Vmpl টা কি দেখাচ্ছে যে যত আমি one more worker কে hire করছি, what is happening to the Vmpl? It's falling, right? Every time I hire a worker, the Vmpl falls, value of marginal product of labor, it's falling, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for example, let's say when the wage is $200, the quantity of labor that will be demanded is 5 workers. That means when the wage rate, when per worker is to be paid $200, the quantity of labor that will be demanded is 5 workers. So এই যে Vmpl curve টা, this is also the demand curve, and this is downward sloping. Because marginal product of labor is downward sloping. Why? আমরা already discuss করেছি law of diminishing marginal returns. কেন এটা demand curve? Think, যত বেশি আমি ওয়ার্কারকে হায়ার করছি কি হচ্ছে, প্রোডাক্টিভিটি কমছে না, বিএমপিএল ফল করছে না?
Yes, ma'am.
When then, therefore, if I know every time I hire a new worker, if I know the VMPL of that worker will be lower than the previous worker, when will I be encouraged to hire a worker? Obviously, as wage falls, as price falls. তো যত বেশি প্রাইস কমবে, ওয়েজ কমবে, তত কি কোয়ান্টিটি অফ লেবার ডিমান্ডেড বাড়বে না? Look at the diagram. The quantity of labor demanded at $200 is 5 workers. The quantity of labor demanded at, let's say this is $150, is 6 workers. What is happening? As wage falls, quantity of labor demanded কি বাড়ছে না কমছে?
বাড়ছে।
বাড়ছে. That's the demand curve. Just like any other good, this is the demand curve for labor for an individual firm. As the wage falls, the firm is willing and able to hire more workers. And why is it the same thing as the VMPL curve? Think, calmly think karo. VMPL কি বলছে? That every time a new worker is hired, the value of the marginal product of that worker is less than the previous worker, which means the new worker is less productive than the previous worker. তাহলে if you are a producer, when will you be willing to hire that worker? Obviously, if wage falls, তাহলে আমি কেন এই নতুন ওয়ার্কারটা হায়ার করতে চাবো যদি সে আমাকে আগের ওয়ার্কার থেকে কম বেনিফিট দেয়? এটা কি বোঝা যাচ্ছে?
Yes, ma'am.
So that's why your VMPL curve is also the demand curve. যে কোনো একটা factor of production, land, labor, capital, value of marginal product যে curveটা, it is also the demand curve for that factor of production for the producer. এখানে labor market দেখছি, that's why the VMPL curve is also the demand curve of labor for the producer. So this is downward sloping, demand curve is downward sloping. So as wage falls, quantity demanded of workers rises. As wage rises, quantity demanded of workers falls. So wage is the price of workers, which means the price of the workers and the quantity demanded of workers will have an inverse relationship. Just like any good, the price of a good and the quantity demanded of a good have inverse relationship. Price বাড়লে quantity কমে যায়. এখানে same thing, it's the labor. The price of the labor is wage and the quantity demanded will have an inverse relationship. That's why it's downward sloping. As wage increases, quantity demanded of workers will fall. As wage falls, quantity demanded of workers will rise. So the VMPL curve is also the labor demand curve for an individual producer. So আমরা এখানে দেখেছি that what happens, how do I determine my VMPL, how do I determine how many workers to hire? এখানে আমরা দেখছি what happens if the wage changes. So if in the market আমাদের যদি equilibrium wage কোনো change আসে, it could be for any reason in the market, how will it affect an individual producer's hiring decision? That's what we want to see. So everything else is still the same, but only the wage has changed. So that means, let's say initially wage was $200. Now the wage has increased to W2, which is maybe, I don't know, 280 এমন কিছু একটা হবে. It's higher than $200. So a wage-টা এই যে VMPL curve-টাকে কোথায় intersect করছে? Somewhere here, right? W2 দেখা যাচ্ছে? Can everybody see?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So how many workers are there when the wage is W2? How many workers should the firm hire? 3 workers. So what happened? As the wage increased, what happens? The profit maximizing level of workers have decreased from 5 to 3. That means the quantity demanded of workers have decreased now. Demand curve যদি দেখি আমরা, the same thing as VMPL curve. The quantity demanded of workers have decreased. Why? The wage has increased. So এটাতে কি হচ্ছে? There is a movement along the demand curve. Whenever there's a change in the wage, there will be a movement along the labor demand curve. Just like the price of a good. price change আসলে কি হয়? There is a movement along the demand curve of that good. Suppose the wage decreases from $200 to W3. So it should be somewhere around, I think, $120 বলতে পারি আমরা. So W3, where is it intersecting? It's intersecting the VMPL curve here. So when the wage is W3, how many workers will be hired by this firm to maximize profit? How many workers will be hired? 7 workers. Because at 7 workers, the wage W3 and the VMPL are equal to each other. That means when the wage falls from 200 to W3, the quantity demanded of workers increases from 5 to 7 workers. That's the profit maximizing quantity of workers now. So কি হলো? Wage change হলো, there is a movement along the demand curve. So wage change হলে কি হবে? একই demand curve movement হবে. You would either hire more workers or less workers than before. Is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
এটাতে
ma'am.
কারো কোনো question আছে? Any questions here?
No, ma'am.
Okay, let's take a 5 minutes break. Okay, is everyone here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we looked at how to determine how many workers to hire, the profit maximizing level of workers. Then we looked at what causes movements along the labor demand curve, which is also the VMPL curve. Now we're going to look at what shifts the labor demand curve. So as a producer, when will I be willing and able to hire more workers or less workers at the same wage rate? Just like goods market, যে একই প্রাইসে কখন বায়ার্সরা বেশি বাই করবে একটা গুড অথবা কম করবে. So that's a shift in the demand curve in the goods market. Here, that is a shift in the labor demand curve in the labor market. So when would your producers, who are actually the buyers of this labor factor of production, when would they be willing to buy or hire more workers or less workers, even if the wage has not changed? So holding the wage constant, holding everything else constant, when as a producer would I want to hire more or less workers? These factors will help us determine that. These factors will cause a shift in the labor demand curve. So there are basically three broad factors যেটা নিয়ে আমরা actually discuss করি. The first is changes in the price of the firm's output. The second is changes in the supply of other factors of production. এখানে labor ছাড়া অন্য factors of production use করছি আমরা basically in production such as land, such as capital. What if there's a change in those? And the last is the changes in technology. So let's look at one by one. The first is changes in the price of the firm's output. So remember, the labor demand curve is the same thing as the VMPL curve. So VMPL is price into MPL. That's the price of the product into the marginal product of that labor. So আমি যেই প্রোডাক্টটা সেল করছি মার্কেটে সেটার যদি প্রাইসটা চেঞ্জ হয় তাহলে VMPL চেঞ্জ হবে না?
Yes,
Price
ma'am.
বাড়লে বা কমলে? That means if the VMPL is the same thing as the labor demand curve, and if there's a change in the price of the good that I'm selling in the market, obviously holding everything else constant, your VMPL will also change, which means that if the price of the product I'm selling rises, তাহলে কি হবে? VMPL will rise if price rises, and if the price falls, VMPL will fall. Which means that if VMPL is the same thing as the labor demand curve, if the price of the product I'm selling in the market increases, the demand for labor will rise. The demand curve will shift to the right. Whereas, so the first diagram, এখানে wheat sell করা হচ্ছে, wheater price বেড়েছে. Per bushel of wheat, আগে যদি $20 করে sell করা হতো, এখন per bushel, let's say, is being sold at $25. তাহলে কি হচ্ছে? Everything else is still the same. The productivity of workers and so on, everything is still the same. Which means if price increases and the marginal product of labor is still the same, that means VMPL has also increased. Which means that the demand curve, the VMPL and the demand curve is the same thing, which means it will shift to the right side. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে? প্রাইস বাড়লে কেন VMPL বাড়ছে? এটা কি বুঝা যাচ্ছে? Okay. Now the reason behind this is, এটা first slide এ ছিল যেটা আমি ডিসকাস করি না, I waited for this one, is that factor of production is demand. In this case, labor demand, it's a derived demand. Derived বলতে বোঝাচ্ছে it comes from the good it is producing. It ultimately depends on the product that the firm is producing. So একটা গুডের আমি যে গুডটা প্রডিউস করছি, সাপোজ মার্কেটে তার ডিমান্ড বেড়ে গেল বা সাপ্লাই কমে গেল, whatever reason, যেটার কারণে প্রাইস বেড়েছে, তাহলে as a seller, wouldn't my willingness to produce and supply more in the market would rise? Quantity supplied বেড়ে যাওয়া উচিত না? প্রাইস যদি বেড়ে যায় যে প্রোডাক্টটাকে আমি প্রডিউস করছি মার্কেটে?
Yes, ma'am.
Movement in the supply curve, law of supply. Whatever I'm producing, সেটার প্রাইস মার্কেটে বেড়েছে, তাহলে as a producer, what would I want to do? Produce more and sell in the market. Price বেড়েছে, that means quantity supplied বাড়া উচিত. If I want to supply more in the market, I have to produce more. What does that mean? I will need more workers. মার্কেটে আমি যে প্রোডাক্টটা সেল করছি, wheat, আমি wheat প্রডিউস করি, wheat সেল করি, মার্কেটে wheater প্রাইস বেড়ে, তাহলে according to the law of supply, because I am the seller of wheat, My quantity supplied will increase now because the price of wheat has increased. Now, if my quantity supplied increases, it means that I have to produce more wheat. If I want to produce more wheat, I need more workers, right? আমার আরো বেশি ওয়ার্কার্স লাগবে না আগে থেকে? আমি যদি আরো বেশি উইট প্রডিউস করতে চাই,
Yes, ma'am.
তাহলে কি আমার ওয়ার্কারের ডিমান্ড বাড়বে নাকি কমে যাবে এখন?
Miss Barbe.
বাড়বে ম্যাম।
বেড়ে যাবে। So try to relate it to this in this manner. কেন প্রাইস বাড়লে আমাদের ডিমান্ড কার্ভ রাইটে শিফট করছে? Obviously প্রাইস বাড়লে VMPL বাড়বে। So mathematically I can show it that as price increases of the product that I'm selling in the market, the VMPL of my workers will also increase, which means when the price of wheat rises, the VMPL curve shifts to the right, which is the same thing as the demand for labor curve. But if I try to think a little deeper, what is the reason? Reason is because the price of what I'm selling is higher now, my quantity supplied in the market will rise, which means I have to produce more wheat, which automatically means that at the same wage rate, I would be willing and able to hire more workers. Reason I need more workers to produce more wheat. So এখন কি হচ্ছে, মার্কেটে ওয়েজ ইজ স্টিল দ্য সেম $200. আগে wheater price যা ছিল, according to that, the market wage rate $200. At $200, 5 workers would have been employed, because at 5 workers the BMPL and the wage are the same. But now, because the price has increased, curve has shifted to the right, which means at the state, I, as a firm, am willing and able to hire more workers now. এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
ম্যাম কথা
শোনা যাচ্ছে আমার কথা? এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে?
জি ম্যাম।
Yes, ma'am.
আচ্ছা, I was saying that আগে যখন আমাদের wage rate, আমাদের VMPL আগে without any change at the price of wheat, that was before the change, at $200 per worker wage rate, 5 workers were employed. But the wage rate and the VMPL are equal at 5 workers. Point A, দেখা যাচ্ছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now the price of wheat has increased. আমি যে প্রোডাক্টটা প্রোডিউস করি সেটার প্রাইস বেড়েছে। Obviously VMPL has increased. That means it has shifted to the right side. The demand curve has shifted to the right side, which means at $200, wage is still the same. Now I'm willing and able to hire more workers. How many workers? 8 workers. The demand curve has shifted to the right. Profit maximizing number of workers is higher now. এটা দেখা যাচ্ছে ডায়াগ্রামে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. আমরা same number of workers দিয়ে চিন্তা করি. What is happening to VMPL? Look at 5 workers when the price of wheat was the old price. That means this is where the VMPL is, $200 of the 5th worker. Now when the price of wheat has increased, a 5th worker এর VMPL কত হবে? Somewhere here, right? Much higher than before. Let's say this is 400.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So that means কি হচ্ছে, প্রাইসটা বাড়ার কারণে VMPL বেড়েছে, তাহলে every worker is being able to give me more revenue than before. It's just mathematical. P into VMPL এ price বেড়েছে. That means the VMPL curve shifts to the right, the demand curve shifts to the right. The opposite happens if the price falls. Price of wheat যদি fall করে, VMPL will fall, which means that the VMPL curve or the demand for labor curve is going to shift to the left side. So আগে যখন $200 wage এ 5 workers would have been employed, but now at the same wage 2 workers are being employed. Why? Because the price of wheat has decreased. Obviously my quantity supplied has decreased. I need less workers than before. Therefore the demand for workers have fallen. Left shift হবে। এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is when the price of the product you're producing is changing. Why? Because factor of production, land, labor, capital, they're all derived demand. Derived money, they come from the demand or they come from the production of the good that I'm producing. They depend on that. আমি randomly নিশ্চয়ই বেশি workers, কম workers hire করব না. It will depend on what I am selling in the market. So if I'm selling shirts, market এ যদি শার্টের প্রাইস বেড়ে যায়, তখনই আমার যে শার্ট প্রডিউস করে সেই ওয়ার্কারদের ডিমান্ড বেড়ে যাবে ভার্সেস ইফ দ্য প্রাইস অফ শার্টস ফলস ইন দ্য মার্কেট দ্যাট মিনস তখনই আমার ডিমান্ড ফর শার্ট মেকার্স অর ওয়ার্কার্স দ্যাট প্রডিউস শার্ট কমে যাবে। ইজ দিস ক্লিয়ার?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, changes in the supply of factors of other factors of production, except for labor. So let's say you have land, you have capital, they can definitely affect how many workers you're hiring or not. Reason is they can affect the productivity of your worker. Again, a first দুইটা একই ভাবে ultimately affect করে labor demand curve কে অথবা VMPL curve কে। The first one, এই যে VMPL এর formula, price into MPL, the first point affects the price of the product. The second one, changes in the supply of other factors of production, affects the marginal productivity of labor. So suppose you are producing on a farm, let's say you acquire more land, aro land kinlam, aro jayga ami space amar barlo farming, hoyto I'm introducing more machineries and giving my workers more machines to work with. Age 6 জন মিলে একটা মেশিনে কাজ করতে, এখন 3 জনকে আমি একটা করে মেশিন দিচ্ছি। তাহলে প্রতিটা ওয়ার্কারের প্রোডাক্টিভিটি কি বাড়া উচিত নাকি কমা উচিত? হোয়াট ডু ইউ থিংক?
বাড়বে।
বেড়ে যাবে, রাইট? সো ইফ your capital is not substituting the labor, যে আমি লেবারের জায়গায় এই ক্যাপিটালটা নিচ্ছি, if that's not the case, then giving more machines, giving more capital, giving more resources, giving more land to your workers will increase their productivity. That means in this case, if I have more land or more capital, what is happening? Price market is same producted. This time, MPL is rising. That means ki hocche? P to MPL, MPL jodi increase kore, VMPL will also increase. Which means the labor demand curve will shift to the right hand side. Right. So weighted price barle ja hoy demand curve labor er, আমার other factors of production such as land, such as capital বাড়লে একই এফেক্ট হবে লেবার ডিমান্ড কার্ভে। রিজন কি? ফার্স্ট পয়েন্টটাই হচ্ছে প্রাইসে চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে, আর সেকেন্ডটা সাপ্লাই অফ আদার ফ্যাক্টরস অফ প্রোডাকশনে মার্জিনাল প্রোডাক্ট অফ লেবারে চেঞ্জ হচ্ছে। Think about me. If right now I have this graphic tab on which I can write, when I did not have that, আমার productivity কিন্তু কম ছিল, right? It took me more time to actually write and explain things on the slide. Now I have this extra capital, I have this little machinery, little tool, which is the graphic tab, which is making my job faster and easier. আমি less time এ বেশি achieve করতে পারছি, আমার productivity বেড়েছে। So that means at the same wage rate, more workers will be now demanded. Whereas what happens if you are using machines that have been destroyed, let's say, or their productivity have decreased, or you sold off extra land, তাহলে কি হচ্ছে? All the workers are getting less resources. So when you have less resources, what happens to the MPL, marginal productivity of labor এর কি হবে? আমার কাছে কম মেশিন আছে, কম ল্যান্ড আছে কাজ করার জন্য, আমার প্রোডাক্টিভিটি বাড়বে নাকি কমবে? Can everyone hear me?
ম্যাম কমবে।
কমে যাবে। So if I am giving less machines or outdated machines or less land to work on, as a worker, my productivity will fall. That means এই যে VMPLA, P into MPLA, price same product, marginal product of labor কমে যাবে। Obviously, if price is same and MPL is falling, VMPL will also fall, which means there will be a leftward shift of the VMPL curve or the demand curve. Whenever the marginal productivity of labor is falling due to lower resources available. So as a labor, my productivity also depends on other resources that I need to produce a good or service. If I am given more resources, my productivity rises, VMPL rises, demand curve shifts to the right. If I'm given less resources, my productivity falls, VMPL falls, and the demand shifts to the left. এটা কি বোঝা যাচ্ছে? এটা কি সবাই বুঝতে পারছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Last one, you tell me, changes in technology. Technological improvement, suppose যদি হয়, should I hire more workers or less workers?
আমি ma'am,
As a producer, what should I do? Technology has improved. Production technology has improved. Should I hire more workers or less workers?
Less.
Yes,
Higher
ma'am.
than more.
Less.
Okay. Now the thing is, it can go both ways. Technological progress can make your workers more productive. আমি যদি এখন একটা ওয়ার্কারকে টাইপরাইটারের জায়গায় একটা কম্পিউটার দেই, সে কি আগে থেকে বেশি প্রোডাকশন করতে পারবে, বেশি কাজ করতে পারবে সেম টাইমে নাকি কম?
কম ম্যাম।
বেশি পারবে।
কিভাবে? টাইপরাইটারের জায়গায় আমি তাকে কম্পিউটার দিচ্ছি, বেশি। So that means technological progress in many cases can improve the productivity of workers. তাহলে কি হবে? Productivity of workers বাড়া মানে কি? My demand for workers will increase, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Labor demand will shift to the right. Now, what if this technology replaces the worker? তখন কি হবে? আমি ওয়ার্কারের জায়গায় কি করছি? একটা রোবট নিয়ে আসছি যে 5টা ওয়ার্কারের কাজ করতে পারছে। তখন কি ওয়ার্কারের ডিমান্ড বাড়বে না কমবে?
কমবে।
কমে যাবে। That in that case, because this technology is a substitute for the worker, is replacing the worker, your demand for workers will fall and it will shift to the left side. So ultimately, it depends on the type of good I am producing and how this technology is affecting the labor. So if you, let's say you are, let's say you're a baker and someone gives you, if you're a baker, you have to do it manually. So that means a baking এর যে টুলস হচ্ছে, let's say they have improved over time. আমরা দেখেছি অনেক better machineries এসেছে বেকিং ইন্ডাস্ট্রিতে। Now let's say you are given an automatic bread maker. So আগে যেটা 5 জন বেকার মিলে প্রোডিউস করতে পারতো যতটুকু ব্রেড, এখন একটা ব্রেড মেকার দিয়ে সেটা করা যাচ্ছে। In that case, বেকিং ইন্ডাস্ট্রিতে কি হবে? লেবারের ডিমান্ডটা রাইটে শিফট করবে নাকি লেফটে? Left, because one machine, one baking machine, automatic basically baking machine is replacing 5 bakers. In that case, your demand for bakers will fall. The labor demand curve in the baking industry will shift to the left. But এই যে মেশিনস গুলো প্রোডিউস করা হচ্ছে যেখানে, সেখানে তো লেবার দরকার। সেখানে কি লেবারের ডিমান্ড বাড়বে না কমবে?
বাড়বে ম্যাম।
বেড়ে যাবে। So it ultimately depends on the type of product we are producing. Now, in most cases, a very small portion of basically the market is being overtaken by technology. So labor demand ta in most cases বেড়ে যায় যখন technological improvement হয়। Why? Because better technology increases the productivity of your current workers. That's why. So it's not যে machine will replace man completely. এই জিনিসটা আসলে হবে না কখনো। Yes, in many factors, in many types of industries, yes, there has been a shift in the labor demand curve on the left side because better machines have been able to basically decrease the need of workers as much. But that's a very small part of the bigger picture. The majority of markets have seen a higher demand for labor due to better technology. So সাধারণত টেকনোলজির যে impact on productivity is much higher in terms of positive impact than the negative impact. So it depends on the type of product. So if you think of, let's say, sewing clothes, so you still need a person to cut your clothes and make that dress. But because of automated, let's say, sewing machines, rather than doing it completely by hand manually, this machine is making it faster. এই ওয়ার্কারটা আরো বেশি কাজ করতে পারছে, তখন কিন্তু ওয়ার্কারের ডিমান্ড বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। So it ultimately depends on the type of product that is being produced. এখন আমি যদি একটা কোয়েশ্চেন দিই যে এখানে ওরা রোবট ইন্ট্রোডিউস করছে ভার্সেস ওয়ার্কার্স, তখন তুমি বলতে পারবা যে লেবার ডিমান্ড কমে যাচ্ছে in this market. Reason is this machine is replacing the workers. That's why. But if I tell you that, okay, in this industry, better technology, better computers are helping workers to produce more, you know that in this industry, the demand for labor is actually rising. So this whole fear that better technology will ultimately replace human beings, that's not actually correct. It's a very small part of what's happening. Could be small situations যেটা হচ্ছে. The larger impact is generally better technology can improve productivity of workers and therefore in most cases increase the demand for labor. So ultimately the type of good and the situation সেটা পরেই আমরা বুঝতে পারবো যে এখানে labor demand বাড়বে নাকি কমবে due to technology. Is everyone following?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
কারো কোনো question আছে? Any questions here?
এগুলো কি আমাদের ভাইভাতে থাকবে?
নো, এখন ভাইভা নিয়ে আমি কথা বলবো। সো এভরিথিং এই টপিকের কিছু নেই, লাস্ট টপিক বাদে। So you have everything else. So Viva, what I wanted to talk about was, so this is, as I make a total description দিয়েছি, that's like you have around 3 to 4 questions that will be asked to you. সবার time slot সবাই দেখেছে?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That means you have to enter at that time, not before that. যার যে টাইম দেওয়া হচ্ছে, enter the Google Meet at that time. Class timing হবে, and very short questions. For example, an example could be আমি বললাম যে what will happen in this market if the demand for the product rises? So your answer would be, okay, price বাড়বে, equilibrium quantity বেড়ে যাবে. Short questions like this. Or if I ask you, explain what do you understand by a monopolistic market? Short questions like this. I want to see if you remember anything in the whole semester that you studied. So very short questions, 3 to 4 questions. শোনা যাচ্ছে? সবাই শুনতে পারছে আমার কথা?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you should review everything you've learned so far. ঘুরে ফিরে everything is connected to each other. So that means concept যদি মোটামুটি clear থাকে, you should be able to answer the questions. So যার যে টাইমে সেই টাইমে এন্টার করতে হবে Google Meet এ। Anything else?
ম্যাম ফার্স্ট সেকেন্ড মিড থেকে কোশ্চেন তো আসবে নাকি?
হ্যাঁ, কি বললাম, সব আছে সেমিস্টারে এক্সেপ্ট ফর দিস টপিক, ফ্যাক্টর মার্কেট ছাড়া সব আছে।
ম্যাম আমি লাস্ট 2টা ক্লাস অ্যাটেন্ড করতে পারিনি ম্যাম।
তোমাকে আমি মনে হয় ইমেল দিয়েছিলাম, রিপ্লাই করেছিলাম।
ও খেয়াল করিনি ম্যাম, একটু চেক করে আসতে হবে।
Wait, who's speaking? Sipat, right? নাকি কে কথা বলছে?
ইয়েস ম্যাম।
হ্যাঁ, আমি তোমাকে রিপ্লাই দিয়েছিলাম। তুমি 2টা ক্লাস মিস করেছিলে, আমাকে বলেছিলে, আমি বলেছিলাম যে ইউ নিড টু স্টার্ট স্টাডিং